Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Most Wanted series. And it's book number 1, Planet of the Lawn Gnomes. Okay, off the bat about this book. This book really exposes to me the big picture that was Most Wanted. I only have one other book after this, and it's Dr. Maniac Will See You Now. And I'm almost willing to bet, from what I've heard, that book is going to be terrible. After reading this, like I said, Most Wanted really feels like this book done pretty much throughout the main core 10 books. You have these wacky, crazy ideas with silly, wacky hijink humor and some really bizarre characters that aren't really all that likable sometimes. And then you have these ridiculous final acts in almost every single book. It's almost in every single one, where it's just way over the top, way too out there, way too silly, and really bad. This book's no exception. But I'd be lying if I said that I am torn. For the first time in this, journey of mine, reading all these Goosebumps books, I have never been stumped on where I feel about a book as much as this book. Because in a lot of regards, this book is bad. Like bad. And we'll get to that later on. But then in a lot of regards, this book is fun. It's engaging. It's kind of dumb fun. It's kind of like dumb fun. Maybe some might consider it's so bad it's good. Maybe some might think this is one of the worst Goosebumps books of all time. And I understand both sides of the coin. For once. Like, I totally see. I'm not going to bat for either way here. I can totally see if you enjoy this, and I can totally see if you hate this, because this is a polarizing just initial read-through for me. If I read it again, I might be able to concrete more opinions, but man, this is a really weird Goosebumps book. So, yeah, this is a sequel, in the Most Wanted series, before we go into the plot overview. The Most Wanted series was kind of poised to be a series where you have Most Wanted monsters from Goosebumps. And the first book to kick it off is a Lawn Gnome sequel. To even call this book a sequel is kind of egregious. But who was asking for a Lawn Gnome sequel? And this came out before the movie, right? Who was asking for a Lawn Gnome sequel? Beats me. But we got it. And we got to review it. So, without further ado, let's get into the plot of review without giving too much away. So, the main character is named Jay Gardner. And Jay is a 12-year-old kid, and he lives in a new town. And Jay is kind of a typical kid you don't like to read in Goosebumps. He's annoying, he likes to pull pranks on people, his sense of right and wrong is very contorted. But for a change, you kind of understand his character. There's a monologue pretty much from the beginning. And Jay introduces himself as a kid. He causes trouble, but he's really a good kid. He just struggles with his boredom. And there's nothing to do in this town. And he doesn't really have friends, so he kind of acts out a little bit. But he's not trying to do much harm. But then you see him, one of the first things he does in this book, I kid you not, he walks by his neighbor across the street named Mr. McClatchy. He's kind of depicted, kind of like if you've ever seen Monster House and Mr. Nevercracker. He's kind of like the Mr. Nevercracker of this story. Mr. McClatchy's just an angry old man, and he's always telling him to get off his lawn, taking his stuff if it gets on his lawn. So Jay wants to have a little bit of fun with him. He goes over and sees that his trash is beside his mailbox. And he sees that one of his windows is open. So he decides to prop a ladder up to an open window to make his neighbor think that somebody's going to break into his house, because he's a paranoid kind of guy. But then he goes over to the trash, and he starts putting putrid trash into the mailbox of his neighbor. And while he's doing this, he thinks he sees somebody spying on him through the bushes. And he goes over to investigate and sees that they're lawn gnomes. And he starts to question, why are all these lawn gnomes around his neighborhood? He's noticed this since he's moved in. All the houses nearby have lawn gnomes. So he decides to vandalize the lawn gnomes and go back to doing his hijinks. But then he gets cornered by Mr. McClatchy and catches him red-handed. And he causes a ruckus, and this brings over his dad, who's walking his dog. And I forget the dog's name, but he's a golden retriever. And Jay's dad comes over, talks to Mr. McClatchy, and, Jay's like, I'm just bored, right? And the dad's like, okay, whatever. And Mr. McClatchy's like, just don't let it happen again. So Jay gets kind of a scolding and by his father, saying, hey, look, we just moved here. We don't need you causing trouble. You need to start behaving yourself. And Jay's like, yeah, I know. And he makes a promise that he's going to behave himself. Well, then you meet his sister named Kayla. And Kayla kind of scolds him too, saying, you're the reason why we had to move here, hinting that something has happened in Jay's past. And Kayla says, well, instead of doing bad things, why don't we do something outside? So they both get on their bikes and head off. Kayla loses track of Jay, and Jay's bike is like an old rusted bike, and he can't get a replacement bike because he's a bad kid. He's not going to get new things from his dad. His dad doesn't like to spoil him. So Jay takes his rusted bike after he loses his sister and rides down a street and does some exploring. And he rides down a hill and accidentally crashes into this other boy. And this boy's name is Elliot. There's a whole scene involving the crash and everything. When the boys find out that they're okay, Elliot's like, hey, why don't you follow me down to this place called the Quagmire? And the Quagmire's down at this end of the road, and it's kind of like a quicksand pit where you throw things in and it just falls down into the goopy sand. So the boys decide that, okay, let's go, and Jay follows them to the Quagmire, and as they're riding their bikes, they head down the hill toward the end of the street where the Quagmire is, and Jay's bike, again, his brakes go out on him, and he flies over the side and falls into the Quagmire. And there's this whole scene where he's struggling, and he's like falling into the quicksand, trying to keep his head above. He's feeling something biting his ankles. That's really creepy. I have thalassophobia, which is a fear of deep water. That gets to me. Something deep down there, you don't know what's down there, that creeps me out so bad. That got to me on a personal level. That scene, it was hard to read. It was scary to me. So he's struggling, and Elliot tries to help him and tries to jump in. Jay's already lost his bike. He's like, oh, I lost my bike. I'm going to have to tell my dad. Then Elliot comes in and then starts drowning himself. And so Jay has to save Elliot and manages to do so just in time. They go to... Sorry, there's beeping. So they they go to the side of the thing. They pull themselves out. And they're both laying there. And then they finally said, well, that was interesting. And Jay's like, yeah, what happened there? My bike lost its brakes. I'm sorry. And Ellie's like, it's okay. But then these two buzzard birds come down and start messing with the boys. And they have to lay there and lay flat. And there's like an additional bird scene where they're trying to like peck at them and stuff. Really creepy. And then the birds fly away eventually. And the boys part ways. And Jay goes home and he notices on the side of his house there's some lawn gnomes that he hasn't noticed before. He goes, where are these lawn gnomes coming from? And he thinks he hears a voice through the door, and it's his dad. And his dad's like, where's your bike? He's like, oh, I lost my bike in the Quagmire. You won't believe me even if I told you. And Jay's father's like, come on, you know better. You shouldn't be doing that. So Jay goes up and takes a shower, has dinner with his family, and tries to go to bed. Then there's a scene that I don't want to spoil, but there's something alluding to the fact that something may not be right at nighttime. So the next day comes around, Jay's in trouble. I think he's been grounded because he lost his bike. And he wants to find something to do, so he wants to go out and walk his dog. So Jay goes out to try to walk his dog, and his dog breaks loose off the leash and starts running into the middle of the street, causing a car to veer off and wreck into a pole. And the person gets out all dazed, and he's saying the word malfunction. And Jay's like, well, what in the world? What is malfunction? And And he decides to go try to find his dog. And eventually he does find his dog, and he manages to get back to the accident scene, and the guy's still saying malfunction. Then the police come and grab the guy, and Jay wanders off. It's like, something's weird. And he keeps noticing that these lawn gnomes, you see them throughout the story, there's lawn gnomes in every lawn. He's like, something's weird about these lawn gnomes. And then his dog lets loose again and makes a break for Mr. McClatchy's porch and pukes all over the porch. And when Mr. McClatchy comes outside, he slips in the puke. And enraged, this actually happens in the book. Mr. McClatchy comes down and kicks Jay's dog in the stomach, knocking him in the air. Straight up animal abuse. Not kidding. And Jay's like, why would you do that to my dog? Causing a ruckus. And he's like, I'm going to do more. And Jay decides to vow revenge. He's like, I'm going to come out tonight, and I'm going to get revenge on Mr. McClatchy. I'm going to come vandalize his gnomes. I'm going to come vandalize his house. Nobody kicks my dog and gets away with it. So, Jay decides to sneak out later that night to get some revenge. And while he's out getting revenge, he heads to Mr. McClatchy's house. He's getting everything set up. He's getting ready, to vandalize his house. And then he's ambushed by lawn gnomes. The lawn gnomes come out and reveal that they're kind of alive. And Jay gets pinned down, and they take a marker and write M on his forehead, and they keep chanting malfunction, malfunction. And Jay's freaked out. He manages to break loose and heads back home. And he's telling his family, look, these lawn gnomes came to life. And his family's like, well, you should know. There's this whole thing about going on through the story, where every time Jay brings up these lawn gnomes, people seem to know what he's referring to, but won't tell him. And Jay's like, feels like he's out of the loop. He's like, something's not right here. So the next morning, he decides to go out again, and he meets up. But before he can, Elliot's at his door, and he invites Elliot into his house and up to his room. And Elliot's there, and he tells Elliot about the lawn gnomes coming to life at night. And Elliot says basically the same thing his dad had told him. So after Jay realizes that that's not going to help anything, he shows him that he has like a chemistry set, and kind of gives a backstory about his chemistry hobby and how he's trying to make, chemicals come together to make a light. So he shows this little light thing that he makes with chemicals to Elliot, and when he blows on it, it creates a big old light, a very bright light. And Elliot kind of like goes unconscious for a minute, and then he reveals that he's okay. And Jay's like, well, that was weird. But they try to, salvage the day anyway, and they decide to go outside. It's getting a little bit late, and they want to hang out a little more before Elliot goes home. And Jay puts, Elliot aside, essentially, and reveals a big old bombshell. That the reason why he had to move to this new town was that him and his former buddy, they were big, science nerds. They like chemistry. And they were working on their light experiment, but it went wrong, and it exploded and caused a house fire. And the house fire got out of control and burned down the entire house. And when Jay tried to tell his side of the story, that it was an accident, his town didn't believe him because he was still a troublemaker. This is like Jay's character, right? He's always going to be that troublemaker. He's never going to be able to get out of that mold people put him in. And this is where he gets kind of relatable in the story, and you kind of start sympathizing with this character a little bit, because you feel for him. You're like, well, that was a genuine accident, and now you have to be punished by moving to a whole new town, because when it was revealed that they didn't believe him, and the judge essentially forced him and his family to move far away, or he was going to get put into a detention facility. So his family had to move. So they moved here to this town for Jay to get, a fresh start and a fair chance. But Jay keeps acting up, and he's having a hard time controlling it, and he also opens up to Elliot about that. And Elliot's like, well, I'm sorry, this is how it is, but I gotta go. See you later. Kind of thing. Elliot goes back home, and he has a talk with his sister Kayla, and his sister Kayla kind of, he has a heart to heart with her, and he has an idea that he wants to go investigate these lawn gnomes, because as he's coming home after hanging out with Elliot, he notices that these lawn gnomes are still around, and he's like, well, I want to get to the bottom of the lawn gnome mystery. They attack me. Something's up with these. I need to figure this out. So after talking with his sister, he leaves his house, and he starts wandering around, and he has this idea to go get Elliot, because all the lawn gnomes are missing. And he goes to Elliot's house, basically peer pressures him out of the house, and they start to wander around. And Elliot kind of reveals to him that you can get in trouble for coming out at nighttime. And that's why nobody's allowed out at night. But the two boys are walking around anyway, and they get ambushed by lawn gnomes. And they get squished into a circle, and all these lawn gnomes across the neighborhood show up, and then Elliot reveals that, I tried to tell you, we get to enjoy the day, and the lawn gnomes get to enjoy the night. We share this planet. And he's like, what are you talking about? What is going on here? And they're taking him down to the quagmire. The gnomes have decided to take him down there. They're chanting malfunction, malfunction, and they want to throw him into this pit. And while they're taking them down there, something happens to Elliot. And there's a big revelation with Elliot. This is one of 3 plot twists in the story. So Elliot is revealed to be something. Okay? And this takes Jay back for a loop. He's like, this can't be happening. This is weird. What's going on? And then he sees a shadowy figure off to the side, and his sister Kayla's there. And Kayla's looking at him, and he's asking Kayla to get help or come help. And Kayla says, no, I can't help you. And then there's a big old bombshell, the second reveal, about Kayla. And you don't see that part coming. You might see the first part coming, especially if you're a seasoned reader. But the second part, you're just like, this is so random. Why is this here? This reveal with Kayla is so bizarre. And then, after the whole thing with Kayla happens, the lawn gnomes take him and throw him into the sand pit. And then he's in the sand pit. He's falling down to the bottom, to the dark. He's feeling something dragging him at the bottom. And he thinks he's a goner. But then there's a net that grabs him. And something is lifting him out of the sand in the quagmire. And then the ending happens. There's a big old bombshell about Jay, about his neighborhood he lives in, about what he's been doing. And it's essentially a Deus Ex Machina type of ending where everything is not as it seems. And Jay's like, okay, well, I guess I'm this now. Because he remembers something. I'll just leave it at that, because if I go any further, it's very spoilerish. He remembers something, and that triggers how he goes about with the ending here. And then the very ending, when everything seems to be resolved in a way, there's a twist involving Jay's dog, and I'll just leave it at that. It's so bizarre, and that essentially is Planet of the Lawn Gnomes. Okay. So, this book, right, I guess I'll start off with the positives. This book actually had some positives for me, and I'm actually going to be the first to say this. I think Jay, let's mention Jay's name. Jay Gardner. He's a gardener. Get it? I like his name. And at first, I did not like Jay. I thought Jay was going to be this really annoying character, and he was kind of annoying for the first, half of the book. But around that halfway point, when he has that conversation with Elliot, that made me really turn on to his character, and I became a fan of his. I started to feel more sympathy for him. I thought, wow, this is actually a really cool way to do a anti-hero in Goosebumps. Normally, you have bully protagonists, and you have protagonists, like likable people. But very rarely do you get an anti-hero. A person that's reluctantly a hero that's not really likable, but they're sympathetic enough and relatable enough that you can kind of plug yourself into them. That's what this character is. He's kind of like an anti-hero in Goosebumps, and I thought this was really well done. Until the final 6 chapters, when you get that 3-stage reveal about what's been going on with this character, which kind of makes this book all for nothing, and we'll get into that in just a minute in the negatives. But Jay, I was surprised by his monologue. I mean, he was very honest about himself. He didn't lie. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He was straightforward. He's like, hey, look, I do bad things sometimes. I try to be a good person. Look, people have pinned me to be this bad person, and I may have done a bad thing, but that's not really me. And then, when he tries to get revenge on Mr. McClatchy, you understand his revenge. I mean, Mr. McClatchy goes so far to kick, his dog. I mean, that's horrible. So, yeah, you understand Jay. Jay's a pretty well done character. Like I said, until the final 6 chapters. Kind of rough in the beginning, but gets really good in the middle. I was really surprised by that. Some scenes in this book are straight up disturbing and dark. And this book, in spirit, feels like a Series 2000 book. When you have these Series 2000 was kind of like Most Wanted in the vein that it's like experimental, over the top sometimes. Tries to go a little darker route with its storytelling. Planet of the Lawn Gnomes has some dark elements in it. It does. You have that animal kick scene. You have some scenes with birds, like basically trying to like kill them. There's even a scene, I didn't mention this, there's a scene with his dog, where his dog gets carried away, it's completely random, but his dog gets carried away by these buzzards, and you feel like the dog's about to get taken away to be eaten. And luckily the dog gets saved, but that was really scary too. And some things on a personal level, like I said, I have thalassophobia, a fear of deep water. Animals from the deep creep me out, right? If I see a picture of an anglerfish, I'm like almost on the verge of tears. That's how scared of it I am. When I read that scene of the sand pit, that got to me. That really got to me. That creeped me out. Personally, that's probably one of the more memorable scenes I've read in Goosebumps, only because it just hit me on such a deep level. So, yeah, that was really good stuff. Some really dark elements, and there's also some dark humor that really lands well. This book has some overt humor that doesn't really land all the time, but the book is funny. Like, I found myself laughing. There's a mixture of that dumb, silly stuff, but then you have the actual good and some actually scary stuff in the mix too. And there's some unintentional humor that really lands here. There's I saw a little bit, and I'm not trying to make this up. There's a little bit slight commentary about neighborhoods and like homeowners and like them talking about uniformity. Like there's it feels like there's a layer of subtext, very thin layer, not deep at all, but you can kind of understand that this book is talking about uniformity and like the picturesque, suburban lifestyle. It's kind of quite poking a hole at that. And I kind of find that funny that R.L. Stine thought that lawn gnomes, of all things, kind of like can be used to do this. There's some things about it that kind of click, right? And, there are some cringy humors, and now we're getting to kind of the negatives. There are some cringy humor in this book that is really cringy and not funny. Very reminiscent to the first Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes book. But it's hit or miss. Most of the cringe comes from the final 6 chapters. And let's just get this out the way. The final 6 chapters, right? Before we even got to this point of the book, I was like, why do people hate this book so much? Like, I honestly think this book is better than How I Met My Monster. This was pretty engaging. I liked it. You didn't have much plot to it, just a bunch of stuff randomly was happening, but I liked it. And then I understood. The final 6 chapters not only are predictable, because there's hints about this throughout the whole story. Like I said, if you've read A Shocker on Shock Street, if you've read Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, or Welcome to Camp Nightmare, you have read this book. We're kind of getting into some originality negatives here. All of these plot points have been done before, so you know what's going to happen in the story. The first part of the twist, totally predictable. The third part of the twist, totally predictable. But that second part of the twist, with the sister, is bad. Why? That's it. It feels so random to put that there. in the third part of the twist kind of helps make that make sense. But why? I thought that connection between Jay and his sister was kind of cool in the book. And them getting rid of, like, essentially, going past that and trying to do a whole reversal on that upsets me. And not to mention, the twist, the last twist, completely takes away all those emotions you feel about Jay throughout the story, because it's essentially one of those all-for-nothing books. Very reminiscent to books like Dr. Maniac versus Robbie Schwartz. And that really pissed me off. I was like, come on, man. For once you get an anti-hero character that starts out bad, then turns out good, and you do it like that to him. Yeah, that really upset me. Another negative I have is the lack of plot in the book. Okay, we'll get to the plot. There is no plot to this book. A bunch of stuff just randomly happens. It's sewn together by situations, and those situations are loose, and there's really no point. You start out, you're like, okay, this book, you see the book, it's about lawn gnomes. Lawn gnomes are throughout the story, but you don't really get to turn on the story with the lawn gnomes until about halfway through. It's a bunch of, like, just pranks, getting in trouble, going off doing hijinks with your friend, getting stuck in sand pits, just random stuff. No real tangible plot. And while that can be a negative, it was engaging, and there was a lot of stuff going on to make it kind of enjoyable. But the overall plot, given, like I said, the twist, it's an all-for-nothing story. So, there's no plot, the story's for nothing. It's kind of a waste of time. And that's unfortunate. So yeah, with the final few chapters and then the plot, that really hurt this book, like in points. But there's also one last negative I have. And how is this a sequel? I've seen, some loose sequels. Creature Teacher: The Final Exam. Is it a sequel? Is it a prequel? I don't know. It's very loose. Some slappy sequels are very loose. Even Wanted: The Haunted Mask is very loose. But this takes the cake for pretty much, this could be its own universe of lawn gnomes. The lawn gnomes from Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes that you might love, like Hap and Chip, they aren't in this book. I don't even think they're the same species of lawn gnomes, to be honest. given the whole twist of the story, it's so loose. Like, why even do a lawn gnome sequel if you're not going to go back to those characters? But there's give and takes with it. I do kind of enjoy this setup a little bit more. Because it gets to, it goes into some vagueness with it. They do some more creepy stuff with them. But how is this a sequel? Okay, so that's essentially all I got for negative. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, for the final 6 chapters, I'm being honest, y'all. For the final 6 chapters, I deducted 1.5 points off the top. So we're already down to a 3.5 out of 5. The final 6 chapters are infuriating. They're predictable. It's bad, and it's a 3-tier twist. The second tier is just a bad twist. Third tier is also predictable. You've seen these twists before. Executed poorly. And I guess we'll bring this up as an additional negative real quick. The very ending is a wet fart. But it made me laugh. But it's a wet fart. Okay? The final 6 chapters are a doozy. Completely way down this book. So we're down to 3.5. Not to mention the lack of plot. The lack of meaning in the story for with the plot. I deducted 0.7 off. I can be, forgiving on the lack of plot, but with the twist and how the story wraps up, it's an all for nothing story, and I feel like I wasted my time getting invested into this character. And it's just really, the whole book exudes this dumb aura. And it's just bad. Like, you can clearly tell that this book is bad. Now, if it's bad on purpose, I couldn't tell you. If this was made to be bad on purpose, I could believe that. But I'm being honest. Like I said, with all those problems, I deducted accumulatively 2.2 points off, and I gave this book a 2.8 out of 5, which is a D minus, but it's an enjoyable D minus. It's kind of in the same vein of a book like Full Moon Fever, but I do enjoy this one more than Night of the Puppet People in the series, so I did, give it a little bit more than that. And I do enjoy this more than Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, the original book. That book was just kind of bland and dull, with cringy characters and, lack of plot and lack of resolution with what the story was even trying to bring to the table. This was just dumb fun. Some fun parts, some cringy parts, some really bad parts, but it could be worse. And I totally understand if you think this is one of the worst Goosebumps books of all time. I understand completely. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Planet of the Lawn Gnomes. Let me know down in the comment section down below. Do you love this book or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.